In 2011, researchers at the University of Chicago ran an experiment. They took students who were about to sit for a high-stakes biology exam and gave half of them a very simple instruction. For 10 minutes before the test, write about your fears. That's it. Just write down what you're anxious about. Now, the anxious students who did the writing exercise scored nearly a full letter grade higher than the anxious students who didn't. 10 minutes. 1 letter grade. But here's what makes this finding remarkable, because after the writing exercise, the anxious students performed just as well as the students who weren't anxious at all. It didn't just help, it completely closed the gap. So what's actually happening here? How can 10 minutes of writing undo the damage that anxiety does to exam performance? And more importantly, if anxiety is costing students letter grades on exams, what else can we do about it? Because let's be honest, telling someone to just relax before a final has never worked in the history of telling people to relax. Today we're going to break down exactly what anxiety does to your brain and the specific techniques that are all backed by research that can neutralize it. To understand why anxiety destroys exam performance, you need to understand working memory. You can think of it as your brain's mental workspace, that place where you hold information while you're actively thinking about it. Working memory has a limited capacity. Most people can only juggle about 4 to 7 chunks of information at once. And during an exam, you really desperately need that workspace in order to reason through the questions. Anxiety generates intrusive thoughts. What if I fail? I should have studied more. Everyone else looks calm. What's wrong with me? Those thoughts aren't just unpleasant, they're actually taking up space. They're occupying slots in your working memory that you need for the actual exam. So the more you worry, the less cognitive capacity you have left for thinking. You see, this is why anxious students will often say things like, I knew the information, I just couldn't find it during the exam. Because they actually probably did know it. And the problem is that the worry was just occupying their working memory. And so then they didn't have enough bandwidth to actually retrieve that information. So the question isn't, how do I stop being anxious? That's like saying, stop thinking about a sandwich, right? As soon as I say it, you're going to think about a sandwich. The real question we want to ask ourselves is, how do we free up that working memory that is possessed by the anxiety? And this is where the writing intervention comes in. When you write about your worries before an exam, you're doing something counterintuitive. You're not pushing the anxiety away, you're giving it somewhere else to live. Researchers call this cognitive offloading. By externalizing the worries, you're getting them out of your head and onto paper, you free up the mental bandwidth that they were consuming. The fears don't disappear, but they stop competing for space in your working memory. Now, if this sounds too simple to work, I get it. Because at first glance, this sounds like something you'd find in a cheesy self-help book and not a peer-reviewed study. But the research here is surprisingly robust. The original study was published in Science, which is one of the most prestigious journals in the world. And it's been replicated in classrooms with standardized testing environments all across different subjects. And the effect is consistent. Expressive writing before high-stakes exams improves performance, especially for anxious students. So this is actually really easy to do. About 10 minutes before the exam, you're just going to sit down and write down everything. Now, you can do this the night before if you don't have the time, but the goal here is to get as close to the test as possible. But just write everything, all your feelings, all your worries, all your fears about that exam. You just want to go ahead and write that down. You don't want to censor yourself, so don't worry about grammar or spelling. This is just to write about what you're afraid of. Like, what's at stake? Like, what's the worst case scenario? The more specific you are, the better. And that's because vague worry is still going to stay lodged in your working memory, but specific externalized thoughts, that's going to vacate your working memory. Now, this is something I've been doing for a long time with my students. If I ever have, say, a review day, what I'll do is I'll have everyone pull out a piece of paper and then they go through the exercise. And then immediately after, I will then put on one of Ken Hub's quizzes and we will just go through it as a class. And so as we're going through, what I notice, and I get that this is anecdotal, but what I notice is these same students who I have been teaching for weeks, sometimes months at this point, are performing better. And the whole idea behind this is to give them a confidence boost. That way, they can go into the actual exam feeling like, you know what, maybe I actually do know this. So just think, if that's useful in this little testing and microcosm environment that I've generated, how much more useful can it be right before an exam? But cognitive offloading is just one piece of the puzzle, and that's because anxiety doesn't only affect what happens during the exam. It can sabotage everything that comes before it. A few years back, I made an observation when I was sitting there in class, and that was the most anxious students that I had were the ones who were studying the most. Right? Like they were the ones who were just like compulsively studying at every opportunity they had. When we're going through their stressors and everything, they're telling me just like, I'm studying. And I'm just realizing like they are the most frantic studiers out of all of the students. And yet they're the ones who are also performing the worst, which is tragic because they're putting in the hours, but they're not really learning, and they understand that. They feel, they can sense that they aren't learning, and it creates a vicious cycle. There's more fear, more frantic studying, and there's less actual retention, and then it leads to more fear. To break this cycle, you want to do something that is going to sound very counterintuitive, but I can assure you it works. What you want to do is give yourself scheduled worry time. I'm talking, so say like you're at the end of a study session, you close your book, and then you sit there, and you allow yourself to be as stressed as you need to be in that moment. We all have this idea that you're supposed to feel really good after a study session. You're supposed to feel like you're getting all of it. And maybe you are, and maybe you will. But if you are allowing yourself to be stressed, then you're not fighting, the anxiety. Instead, what you're doing is you are offloading it from the working memory in that moment. And I can tell you, I've seen this so many times with students, the ones who do that are going to consistently get better at managing their anxiety. But there's another factor that most anxious students completely overlook. And this is one that can either amplify or diminish every other thing we've talked about already. I need you to look me in the eyeballs as I say this. You need to get more sleep. And I know you're going to be like, hey, I'm already doing it, or hey, I got to No more excuses. You need to get more and even better quality sleep, right? It's not just the amount, you need to get better quality sleep. And that's because lack of sleep and anxiety are not two separate problems. They amplify each other. So what you need to do is really make this a priority. Research shows that staying awake for just 17 hours produces cognitive impairment equivalent to a blood alcohol level of 0.05%. That's close to the legal limit for driving in many places in the United States. I want you to think about that for a moment. Let's say that you're up studying until midnight, and then you have to wake up at 7 a.m. to go take your exam. That is the cognitive equivalent of taking your test with a couple drinks in your system. I don't care who you are, that means you are not taking that exam at your best. But here's the thing. Despite what I just said, there is even more surprising nuance to this than you'd think. A study tracking college students with wearable sleep monitors found something very surprising. Yes, the sleep you get before an exam matters, but not as much as the consistency and quality of sleep that you get over the entire month leading up to the test. Sleep quality across the preparation period explained about 25% of the variance in exam scores. That's enormous. It means how you sleep for weeks before the test matters more than a single all-nighter, and also more than most study techniques. Here's the thing. Sleep deprivation doesn't just impair your cognition, it fuels emotional reactivity. When you don't have enough sleep, your brain essentially just goes into hyperactive mode. You start to see more risks everywhere, and you start to worry a lot. So the student who sacrifices sleep to study more is actually doing two things wrong at once. They're impairing their ability to learn and remember, and they're amplifying the very anxiety that will hijack their working memory during the exam. Now, I want to give you one more technique, but this is going to be different than the others because this one isn't trying to get rid of your anxiety as much as it's trying to redirect it. When you're feeling anxious before an exam, you have a racing heart, sweaty palms, butterflies in your stomach. All that is a physiological arousal. And the interesting thing is that is almost identical to excitement. The physical sensations are the same. What differs is the story you tell yourself about them. Research on anxiety reappraisal shows that when people interpret their arousal as excitement rather than fear, they actually perform better. Not because the arousal goes away, but because they stop fighting it. So the next time you sit down for an exam and you feel that rush of adrenaline hit your body, I want you to try something different. Instead of saying, I'm scared, or I don't know what's gonna happen, and all that normal anxiety talk, I want you to reframe it. I want you to say, I'm excited. This is gonna be good for me. My body is ready. Let's do this. And I get it, it sounds almost too simple, but studies show that this tiny reframe measurably improves performance on everything from public speaking to math tests. Okay, so now what I want to do is give you a very specific protocol that you can put into practice for your next exam. 2 weeks before the exam, you need to establish a sleep schedule, and this is non-negotiable. So 7 to 8 hours, and it needs to be consistent. 1 week out, you want to add scheduled worry time to your daily routine. This could be 15 minutes, same time each day. When anxious thoughts interrupt your studying, acknowledge them and defer them to that window. This contains the anxiety without suppressing it. Then, the night before the exam, do your expressive writing exercise. 10 minutes at minimum, longer if you need it, and get every single fear onto paper. And then, and this is crucial, you get to bed at your normal time. No last minute cramming. Whatever you don't know by now, you're not going to learn at midnight. On the morning of the exam, when you feel the nerves kick in, and I promise you will, you want to use the reframe. I'm excited. My body is ready for this. Don't fight the adrenaline, redirect it. And if you can, do a brief expressive writing session right before the exam. Even just 5 minutes helps. Some students will do this in the hallway before they walk into class. And if you want to put this to the test, you need to check out KenHub. We use spaced repetition quizzes, which is where we ask you a question in one way, and then we'll ask it to you a little bit later down the road in a slightly different way, and then we'll do that again and again and again. And the research has shown this is one of the most, if not the most effective way to quiz someone. And it's something you can test yourself with right here, right now. All you got to do is check the link down in the description below. But thanks for hanging out with me, and I will see you in the next video.